Every generation claims that suffering is unique. Depression-era kids lost jobs and homes. Arcade kids lost quarters to Pac-Man cabinets. Gen Z, born into the wealthiest societies in human history, got something new to grieve: a flavored nicotine stick called Geek Bar sold in gas stations to teenagers who can't legally buy a lottery ticket. That comparison alone tells you something about how incentives shifted. Call being Gen Z terrible and you're exaggerating, obviously, but strip the hyperbole and there's a real claim underneath. A generation raised inside systems built for someone else's economy, someone else's housing market, someone else's attention span. The exaggeration is bait. The mechanism underneath it is not. In 1938, a 20-year-old complained about hating his paper route. The system's answer wasn't sympathy or a raise, it was conscription to Germany. That's the oldest trick incentive structures play. Complaints about small burdens get answered with catastrophically larger ones, and the person complaining rarely gets to choose which burden lands on them. Born in 2004, this narrator is part of the first cohort with full internet access baked into childhood, not bolted on later. Every prior generation adopted the internet as adults with formed habits. This one absorbed it as a nervous system default before puberty, which means the internet isn't a tool they use, it's an environment they were shaped by. A device in your pocket delivers a cooking recipe, unverified medical advice, and a list of nearby singles within the same 90 seconds. That's not convenience, that's a collapse of gatekeeping. For all of human history, information had friction, cost, expertise, travel. Now the friction is gone, and the filtering that friction used to provide is gone with it. 2 to 3 hours a day on one app, by his own admission, is enough to trigger a specific kind of shame. The post-nut clarity feeling, seeing the number and immediately regretting the decisions that produced it. Notice the behavior. He avoids checking the screen time stat on purpose. Avoidance of data is itself data. It means the system already knows the answer and doesn't want it confirmed. Short-form platforms didn't just shorten videos, they retrained the reward loop underneath attention itself. TikTok and Instagram Reels compress the dopamine hit into 15 seconds instead of 15 minutes, and the brain, being an efficient optimizer, adapts to the cheaper reward. The claim that nobody can focus past 3 seconds isn't an insult, it's a description of trained behavior. 15-second intermissions between online matches are apparently not long enough to sit in silence anymore. Someone's TikTok audio is guaranteed to be blasting through the microphone. That's the tell. When a 15-second gap in stimulation feels unbearable to a mass of people simultaneously, you're not looking at individual weakness, you're looking at a trained population-level response. 8-year-olds handed iPads today are the control group nobody asked for. If a 20-year-old raised on early smartphones already avoids his own screen time stats out of shame, what happens to a child whose entire early emotional regulation was outsourced to a tablet from age 2? The prediction here, kids picking at their skin like addicts when the battery dies, reads dark, but it follows the same trend line forward. Constant 5-second dopamine hits don't just shrink attention span, they recalibrate what qualifies as funny, interesting, or worth doing. Milestones that used to arrive on schedule, starting a career, starting a family, get pushed later not from laziness but because the reward system driving decision-making has been retuned toward instant low-stakes stimulation instead of long-delayed payoffs. Think back honestly over the last 24 hours. Chances are good some meaningful slice of it went to a feed. Not a conversation, not a task, a feed. Maybe it was a clip forwarded to a friend. Maybe it was 8 hours of doom scrolling in bed while something important sat undone. The point isn't judgment, it's that this pattern is now close to universal, which makes it structural, not personal. Social media does offer something real, a place to express an identity and get instant tangible support for it, often from strangers who'd never have crossed your path otherwise. That's not nothing. Communities form there that couldn't have existed in a pre-internet geography. The upside is genuine, it's just packaged with a cost structure most people never priced in. Every prior generation experienced media. This one is arguably the first shaped by a bidirectional feedback loop, not just consuming content, but being profiled, targeted, and reserved based on every second of attention given. Social media isn't a channel Gen Z uses. It's closer to an environment with a data pipeline running the other direction too. The joke about the 1300s, no TikTok, just the Black Plague, lands because it's technically true and reveals something real. Boredom used to come packaged with mortal risk, not infinite stimulation. Modern boredom is a solved problem in the sense that it's never actually experienced anymore. Whether removing boredom entirely from a developing brain is actually a net good is a separate, unresolved question. High school scrolling sessions on TikTok and Instagram Reels are described as making an already fried attention span measurably worse. This isn't anecdote dressed as data, it lines up with what's known about intermittent variable reward schedules. The same mechanism slot machines use. 30-second videos with layered subtitles and gameplay overlays are engineered, not accidental, to hold attention that would otherwise wander. The 8-second attention span statistic gets thrown around constantly, often compared unfavorably to a goldfish. Whether the number is precisely accurate matters less than what it signals. A self-reported sense widespread enough to become a meme, that sustained focus has become the exception rather than the norm for an entire generational cohort raised on infinite scroll. If short-form content already reshaped attention spans in people who got their first phone as teenagers, the trajectory for kids getting phones in preschool points somewhere worse, not better. Each cohort gets exposed earlier than the last, with less developed executive function to resist the pull. Nothing in the current trend line suggests this reverses on its own. Trouble focusing shows up everywhere: school, work, even watching a YouTube video straight through. The brain wants 5 tasks running simultaneously, yet somehow struggles to complete the single low-effort task of making a bed in the morning. That contradiction, high appetite for stimulation paired with low follow-through on simple tasks, is a specific and recognizable pattern, not random inconsistency. That pattern, needing 5 things running at once, struggling with simple follow-through, leads to a suspicion of ADHD, immediately hedged with a disclaimer: not a doctor, don't take this as medical advice. That hedge matters. Self-diagnosis via social media pattern matching has become its own cultural phenomenon, separate from the clinical reality it's borrowing language from. Clinically, ADHD is a neurodevelopmental disorder defined by executive dysfunction alongside inattention and hyperactivity symptoms. It's not one uniform experience. Symptom clusters vary significantly by individual. Some people present with excessive talking, others with almost none. What's consistent across most diagnoses is difficulty regulating attention, not an inability to pay attention altogether. The popular image of ADHD, a loud, easily distracted, disorganized kid, is a caricature that happens to match this narrator's own childhood closely enough to feel accurate. That's worth noting. Cultural stereotypes about disorders often calcify around the most visible presentation, sidelining quieter forms that don't fit the stereotype and go undiagnosed longer as a result. The described need for constant stimulation is granular: fidgeting with an eraser, playing with thumbs, needing YouTube running while eating. None of it is dramatic on its own, but stacked together, it describes a nervous system that treats stillness as an active discomfort to be solved rather than a neutral default state, a pattern increasingly normalized across an entire generation, diagnosed or not. The claim that older generations weren't addicted to phones because there was nothing to do gets a sharp rebuttal. They had cigarettes. Nicotine addiction long predates smartphones. Every generation has had its compulsive, dopamine-driven habit loop. The delivery mechanism just changes shape with available technology. Cigarette use has declined sharply across recent decades, partly because heavy users aged out and died, partly because decades of public health data made the damage undeniable to new users. It's one of the rare generational wins, an addiction visibly, measurably shrinking instead of mutating into a new form. Gen Z, credit where due, mostly opted out of that particular one. Then vaping arrived to fill the gap cigarettes left behind. The narrator admits personal use as a teenager without pretending otherwise, acknowledging in hindsight that it probably wasn't a great idea for long-term health. Delivered with visible self-awareness rather than denial, the habit didn't disappear when cigarettes declined, it just changed packaging. Vapes haven't existed long enough to have real longitudinal health data, and yet adoption raced ahead of the evidence anyway. That's the pattern with most new consumer nicotine products. Mass rollout first, epidemiological findings a decade or two later, by which point millions of people are already the data set. Nobody today can say with confidence what vaping does after 30 years, because 30 years haven't passed. Unlike cigarettes, which announce themselves from across a room, vapes are nearly odorless and small enough to disappear into a pocket. That single design difference, no smell, no bulk, removed most of the social friction that used to make smoke invisible and, to some degree, self-limiting. Easier concealment means easier normalization, especially among people too young to legally buy the product. Anti-smoking PSAs from childhood are remembered vividly, specifically the one with the woman speaking through a tracheotomy hole in her throat, describing a pack-a-day habit that started at 16. That image was designed to be unforgettable, and it worked on an entire cohort of kids who grew up seeing it, even as many of the same kids picked up vaping anyway once it appeared without an equivalent warning campaign attached. Entertainment options a century ago were sparse by comparison. Books, a radio show once a week, rereading the same novel repeatedly because nothing new was coming. Huckleberry Finn over and over. It's framed almost with disbelief. How did people survive without infinite content? But it's a real contrast in the sheer volume of stimulation available per hour of free time then versus now. But the comparison cuts both ways. Entertainment scarcity aside, Gen Z's transition into adulthood happened to coincide with a global shutdown, something no other living generation experienced at the exact moment they were meant to be establishing independence. Timing matters as much as severity. A hardship that lands during a formative developmental window compounds differently than the same hardship landing on an already established adult. The average home price now sits around $300,000, a number that arrived right as this cohort was supposed to be moving out and buying their first place. Compare that to a grandparent's generation where a single income could plausibly support a house and a family by the same age. The math simply doesn't close the same way anymore, and no amount of individual effort changes the denominator. Put a 2019 Walmart ad next to a 2025 one, and the price gap is immediate and visceral. Not just houses and cars getting more expensive, but groceries, the baseline cost of simply existing week to week. This is the part that doesn't show up in headline inflation statistics as vividly as it shows up in a lived grocery bill repeated for the rest of a working life. The recession-adjacent price surge landed with almost suspicious precision right as Gen Z crossed into the age of financial independence, the exact window when previous generations were establishing themselves. A century had passed without this particular convergence of shutdown and inflation hitting one generation's entry point into adulthood so squarely. The timing itself becomes part of the argument. By this exact age, a grandparent would typically already have had a family and a house of their own. A milestone that now reads as almost fantastical for someone in the same age bracket today, watching cartoons in a childhood bedroom rather than furnishing an owned one. The generational math changed, but the cultural expectation of where you should be by now didn't update at the same pace. Unable to buy or even reliably rent, a visible subset of Gen Z has pivoted to trailers, renovated school buses, converted ambulances, anything mobile and cheap enough to function as a home without a mortgage. It's framed with dark humor, tense included, but the underlying behavior is a real documented adaptation to a housing market that priced an entire cohort out of the traditional path. Buy now, pay later services made sense for big-ticket items, an iPhone, a game console, split into manageable installments. But DoorDash partnering with a BNPL provider so a $15 Chipotle order can be split into 3 monthly payments of $5 each is a different category entirely. Financing groceries adjacent spending signals a population with genuinely thin cash buffers, not just impulsive shoppers. January 2020 reports trickle out of a new virus in China. Weeks later, China logs its highest single-day death count from it, over 100 people. Within days, the story crosses from a distant headline into something arriving in every country simultaneously. Spring break for this narrator's high school had just ended when the case count started climbing fast enough to become impossible to ignore. A 2-week school closure, initially treated as an unplanned vacation, quietly became indefinite. Classes moved to Zoom and Google Classroom. And within weeks, the 2-week estimate had evaporated entirely, replaced by an open-ended timeline nobody in a position of authority was willing to commit to. That ambiguity, no end date, just for the foreseeable future, is its own specific psychological weight. Toilet paper vanished from shelves entirely during the early panic, hoarded as if the supply chain itself were ending. Finding 3 rolls became, by comparison, rarer than winning a small lottery. A strange, almost absurd shortage given the actual disruption was in-demand psychology, not supply, since manufacturing never actually stopped. Once the school board announced that nothing completed after lockdown began would count toward final grades, the incentive to attend Zoom classes evaporated for a huge share of students. If skipping an 8 a.m. call has 0 academic costs, skipping becomes the rational choice, not a moral failing, a live demonstration of how quickly behavior follows incentives once the stakes are formally removed. With physical activity near zero and DoorDash and Uber Eats suddenly the default way to eat, weight gain became a common, almost universal side effect of lockdown months. It's described bluntly. Sitting around was fun for a few weeks. Then around the 2-month mark, the body and mood both started showing the cost of a routine built entirely around delivery, food, and a couch. The class of 2020 didn't get a real graduation. Most schools substituted a Zoom call for a ceremony that, for every prior generation, marked a physical communal end to childhood. 12 years of schooling compressed into a screen full of static thumbnails saying congratulations. A milestone that used to be irreversible and shared became, for this cohort, something closer to virtual and solitary. Dad's remote job lands smack in kid's bedroom. Apartment small, no office space, so laptop and mic set up next to my bed. Wake 6 a.m., hear him typing, hear him on calls through thin walls. No door to shut, no boundary between work and rest. Privacy just gone. Whole household stack into few rooms, same air, same noise day after day. Isolation stretched past 2 months, mood shift. Missing simple stuff, bike ride, movie with friends, start weighing heavy. This where depression creep in quiet, not dramatic, just slow drain. Fix, sneak out window near 2 a.m., walk mile to skate park alone, no mask, no distancing rule. Night air, quiet street, small ritual that hold mind together when everything else locks shut. Round year mark, mandates lift. School reopened, jobs resumed, people step outside again like waking from long nap. Feels strange? Return to normal? Almost harder than lockdown itself. Body forgot how to move through crowd talk face to face. 5 years passed since, yet gaps still felt close. Like calendar lie about how much time actually gone. Look back, 2016, wear a golden shine now. No bills yet, no tax form, no war before lockdown hit. Just fidget spinner shortage as biggest worry. Call it peak humanity, half joke, half true feeling. Whole year become dividing line. Before world froze when problems still small enough to laugh at. Vine, 6-second clip app, birth whole wave of future YouTubers Drew Gooden, Danny Gonzalez, David Dobrik, Paul Brothers all start there before app shut down over money problem. Musically run parallel lane, awkward lip sync clips, launch names like Jacob Sartorius. 2 apps gone now, but they seed career path short form creators still walk today. Small indie title, Undertale, breakthrough same year, proved tiny team, beat big budget with story and music alone. Simple pixel graphic, heavy heart underneath. Become touchstone for whole generation of gamer. Referenced years later still. Even personal history tie-in, one of my earliest video ever made, dig deep into that game. YouTube back then run looser, rawer. iDubbbz drop content cop, no filter. Leafy build whole channel bullying strangers on Counter-Strike surf server. Keemstar run drama alert, daily gossip roundup. Actual main news source for plenty kid my age. Which say something scary about media literacy at time. Era let creators say what platform ban now. Mannequin challenge freeze whole rooms mid-motion for camera. Fidget spinner flood store shelf, some resell hundreds on eBay despite costing pennies to make. Hoverboard sell for hundreds, mostly sit unused in closet after month 1. Bottle flip challenge, simplest a bunch, land maybe 1 in 10 try. 4 trends, 4 months lifespan each, forgotten right after. Pokemon Go sweep globally. Strangers gather same park, chasing same digital creature, harmless fun. Then campaign slogan hijack phrase, Pokemon Go to the polls, turn playful thing into political tool overnight. Simple app catch mention in election coverage, and just like that, one pure escape get pulled into tension nobody asked it to carry. Working cashier job, older customer after older customer say same line, you don't work hard enough. Meanwhile, same generation buy 5-bedroom house at 21 off single income. Back when burger cost fraction today's price. Blame land on work ethic, not on decades of price shift. Old people criticize every younger generation. Gen the 10th, millennial too. But complaint toward Gen Z hit sharper, louder. Parental limit lift around age 10, tablet in hand, unlimited access granted all at once. No gradual rollout, no filter beyond whatever platform itself allow. Down that road, sit content built for adult mind, war footage, injury clips circulating classroom, phone to phone before school bell even ring. Exposure land young, land fast, land without anyone deciding it should. Before that shift, explicit promotions stay contained. Meme page nudge toward paid profile, easy enough to scroll past. Once OnlyFans launch, containment break. Fresh account, 3 minutes browsing, promotion already surface. What used to be occasional nuisance become baseline expectation of using platform at all, reshaping what normal even mean online. Every filtered selfie sell impossible standard as achievable default. Photoshop, Facetune, ring light, technical process invisible to young eyes still forming sense of self. Comparison run constant, unconscious, corrosive. Distorted mirror held up daily, mistaken for true reflection, quietly reshaping how whole generations see own worth.